Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Mo Show Live. Hey, I'm Morris Lilienthal. I really try to bring on informative guests and guests that I think can bring a lot to the table, that will bring a lot of information and useful information. And today's guest checks all those boxes. I think, in today's times, I don't know, once a week, if I don't turn on the TV or I pull up social media or I pull up a news website, and there's not something about a data breach, there's not something about identity theft that's in the news. So rampant. We're so dependent upon paying with things online, using our debit cards, using things to try to pay for items or get services, which are making it convenient, but it's also making us more susceptible to identity theft and data breaches and things like that. So those are the kind of things that we're going to be talking about today. I know that's happened to me twice in the last couple of months, where I've had issues where our credit card's been stolen and used for something that we didn't do, or our bank account was used for something crazy and we had to clear it up. It's so frustrating. It makes you a little nervous about what else may be going on and doing. So we're going to be talking about some of those things today. But before I formally introduce our guest, Attorney Micah Adkins, I want to ask everybody, hey, if you're watching, I really think this is going to be chock full of good, useful information. So like and share today's show. If you're watching live, please let us know where you're watching from. And if you got questions, I'll be watching the feed, and we'll get with Micah and ask him this question so we can try to get you some answers and some good, useful information. So today's guest is Micah Adkins. Micah is the founder of the Adkins Law Firm. Micah is a graduate of the University of Texas at Dallas. He's also a graduate of Cumberland School of Law, where I went to law school. I think he was about 2 years behind me. And then Micah has been recognized by several publications as one of the top consumer lawyers in Alabama and around the country. He's been recognized for 4 years in a row as a rising star super lawyer, which, folks, is not easy to get. It's peer recognition, and it's something that's to certainly be proud of. Micah devotes his practice to representing identity theft victims and people who've had improper things on their credit reports or background reports, and he usually represents these folks in federal court trying to get these things removed and fight for any damages they may be entitled to under the law. Micah's got an office in Birmingham, Houston, Texas, Dallas, Texas, in Nashville, and he's joining us from his Nashville office. So Micah, with all that, I know you got a lot on your plate and you got 5 kids and you're married. So I appreciate your time today, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Morris. Thanks for having me and inviting me to be on your show. I think it's great what you're doing and getting the word out to people about different areas that are really important. And I applaud you for that.
Well, I appreciate that very much. I appreciate your willingness. And one thing I'll tell you, folks, is Micah is very generous with his time. He goes out, and I've had him speak to my Rotary Club. It's been a little while now, but I know you came in here and spoke in Madison for me. I know you think you may have done it for Doug Club in Huntsville. So he's well recognized in this area and field, and speaks often at conferences and Rotary clubs and places on this topic. So this is right up his alley. So if you got questions, let us know. But as I kind of started off the show, Michael, identity theft, credit issues are things that are so prevalent now. And I guess where I wanted to start is to start with what I think maybe is one of the bases of your practice, which is credit reports and issues with credit reports. And maybe it seems elementary, but I bet there's some people that are maybe not even sure what exactly a credit report is, because maybe they've never even seen theirs. So can you tell us a little bit about, what is a credit report? What would a person expect to find on that credit report?
Absolutely. A credit report is a report of a consumer's credit history. It may include accounts that they've had in the past. It may include personal identifying information. And it'll also include a section of inquiries. Inquiries is a list of companies who've obtained the consumer's report within the last generally 2 years. And there's many different consumer reporting agencies. Most people, if they know of one, they would think of maybe either Equifax, Experian, or TransUnion. And those 3 companies, Morris, are the known as the nationwide consumer reporting agencies. But there's over 300 consumer reporting agencies in the United States now.
Wow. And so when we talk about getting this, tell us a little bit about the difference in it, because I think people maybe get confused on this, and I want to make sure I understand it right, is what's the difference between a credit report and a credit score?
Right. So the credit report, if you will, is all the information that is used to determine the consumer's credit score. And there's a company called Fair Isaac Corporation, commonly referred to as FICO, that a FICO score is generated using the information from the consumer report. There's all different types of credit scores, Morris. There's FICO scores for auto loans. There's FICO scores for mortgages. And those scoring algorithms are different. In other words, the same score, or a consumer won't have the exact same score for an auto loan score as they would for a mortgage score. Likewise, there is also what I describe as FACO scores on the market. And FACO scores are scores that are prepared by companies like Equifax, Experian, or TransUnion and provided directly to the consumer. And I characterize those as FACO scores because the score will not be exactly the same as what it will be at FICO. And so for consumers, they may obtain a score from Equifax, Experian, or TransUnion, thinking that they're going to get the thumbs up when they go to the car dealer, and then they get to the car dealer who pulls a report with a FICO score, and perhaps it's lower, and so the consumer may get turned down for credit or have to pay higher interest rate or unfavorable terms on the loan.
Well, I didn't know that, and I knew that the information on the credit report, which is what in turn helps determine the credit score, but I had no idea that if I could go the same day to apply for a loan for a vehicle and same day to apply for a mortgage, and my credit score may vary based upon what I'm applying credit for. So that's kind of interesting to know. And then certainly the point about, and I was going to ask you about that, and I want to ask you about where you get these credit reports, because I think there's some misleading information, and I know I've heard you talk about this, that a lot of times people see, well, I want to get my credit report so I can use Credit Karma or freecreditreport.com or something like that. Tell everybody that's watching in either live or the replay where they should get their credit report and the couple of ways that you would recommend them getting it, and then some of the places you recommend they don't get it.
Right. So I enjoy watching baseball, and I tell this story frequently that there was one season that one of the credit monitoring services spent big money to get advertising behind the batter's box at just about every single MLB game that I watched for the year. And one of those advertisements was for a company called freecreditreport.com. And that is not the government or the mandated website for consumers to get their free annual disclosure. In 2003, Morris, and for the first time, consumers like you and me got the right for the first time to actually get our credit report from these companies for free. You see, before 2003, we did not have that right to go just say, hey, I want to get a copy of my free report. So Congress enacted what's called the Fair and Accurate Credit Transactions Act, effective in 2004, which for the first time gave consumers the right to get a free credit report online, by mail, or by telephone. Now, there is a website where consumers can go for that, the annualcreditreport.com website. However, I do not recommend to my clients to go to that website to get their report for a number of reasons, but one of which is when a consumer goes to annualcreditreport.com, the consumer will be vetted, or their information will be verified to say that they are who they say that they are.
Right.
Assuming that they get past that, then they will randomly be redirected to one of the nationwide consumer reporting agencies, such as Experian. Once they're on the Experian site, then the Experian then will ask its own authentication questions to make sure that the consumer is who they say they are. And the problem with that is this. So if you're a victim of identity theft and you have errors on your credit report, you will not be able to answer those security questions correctly. Why? Because an identity thief may have opened up an account with an address that doesn't belong to you, or perhaps opened a credit account that's not yours. So when asked, do you have an account with Capital One, the consumer may answer truthfully, no. However, because they're a victim of identity theft, it'll come up as the wrong answer. Hence, the
Right.
consumer doesn't get it. Secondly, let's assume that the consumer is successful in getting through on Experian to get the credit report. Oftentimes, the credit report that's returned online is very duplicative. So what may generally be a 14 to 20 page report may be a 50 to 60 page report. Well, folks sitting at home may be less likely to print that report off given the number of pages. And then thirdly, let's assume that the consumer gets the report from Experian. The way the annual credit report service works is it'll redirect the consumer back to the website where the consumer then will be redirected randomly either to Equifax or TransUnion, where the same set of questions are asked by those companies. So oftentimes consumers, when they get redirected back, they say, well, hey, I already got my credit report from Experian. I'm not going to go to the other two places. Well, the problem with that is this, that not all bureaus report all information from all creditors and debt collectors. And what I mean by that is this, there may be information that appears on your Experian report that doesn't appear on your Equifax report and vice versa. So the consumer still needs to go and get that report.
Yeah. And I'll echo that. I did it a few years ago and got it online. And fortunately, I hadn't had any issues where there wasn't anything improper on there. But it was a struggle for me to answer some of those questions. And all the information was right because it was dragging out asking questions that were years old, addresses that were older. I couldn't remember what the address or street or so. There were a lot of questions that were qualifying questions that were very difficult. Do you recommend that they just call Micah, or do you recommend they fill out a form and mail in the form to get their free credit report?
Well, I recommend that to my clients and to everyone that I speak to on this issue to use the one-page form. There was a one-page form developed by Congress and subsequently adopted by the credit bureaus. And I'm happy to share that form with you so you can post it on your website and your viewers can download that form. But they simply fill out the one-page form and then mail it off. It goes to an address in Atlanta, which is the central source for consumer free annual credit reports. It'll be processed there, and within 15 days, you should receive your credit reports from Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion by mail.
Okay. Well, that's important information, folks. So, if you're watching, hey, this is Morris Lilienthal. I'm here with Consumer Affairs Attorney Micah Adkins. Micah specializes in this area of the law and helping people who have been the victims of identity theft, who've had issues with credit reports or back account reports. And what we're talking about right now is that it's so important for you to get your credit report and for you to thoroughly check through it. And one thing that I'm hearing Micah say and that I know is true too is that if you get your credit reports from the three bureaus and you line them up side by side, 80% of them, 90% of it may be the same, but there's going to be some differences in the three. And if you don't get all three and check them, you may end up finding out that the one you didn't get is the one that has something inaccurate on it that needs to have some action taken on it. Micah, how long does something stay on your credit report? I mean, if somebody's saying, let's say it's a legitimate issue. Let's say I had a bad debt, I didn't pay it. How long before something should roll off your credit report? How long does it stay on there?
It's 7 years plus 180 days. So it's
Okay.
7 years from the date of the last delinquency. The first delinquency on the account plus 180 days. In my experience, you will see most of the credit reporting agencies in practice will delete derogatory items at the 7-year mark. However, sometimes they don't. Likewise, consumers will contact me and say, hey, I had positive accounts that were on my credit report that no longer appear. Why aren't those accounts on my report? Well, positive history may be reported for up to 10 years. So if it's beyond the 10 years, then some of the consumer reporting agencies then may take it off and they're not report any of that positive credit history.
Real quick, I want to give a shout out to my friend Mitch Jackson out in California who's watching and shared the show. Appreciate that, Mitch. Sharon Wood, who I know from up in East Tennessee at Maryville College. Brian Gossett, who was a good friend of mine. I played football with at Maryville College, who's up in the Alcoa area, and several other folks. We appreciate you guys watching. So we're talking about the credit report. So I guess to kind of sum up this area before I want to jump onto another topic and then and kind of pull all this together, you advise, I guess, that we're entitled under this federal law to get our credit reports once a year, and that we should get all three of them once a year. Would you advise that?
Correct.
Yeah. And would you advise, should you get all three at the same time, Micah? Or I know I've heard you one time say it's possible you could get one a quarter and then have one each, every 4 months. Is it better to do it one way or the other, or is it just depends upon if you've got something you're looking for?
Yeah, so I say it depends on the circumstances. So if you firmly believe that you're a victim of identity theft, perhaps you're receiving phone calls for debts that don't belong to you, or you're unable to get credit because you already know that there's items on your credit report that don't belong to you, then I would recommend go ahead and get all three at one time. Now, if you don't have that concern, I would suggest then exercise your right quarterly. Go get it from one bureau, make sure everything's right on it. If everything's kosher on it, then the next quarter, then go get it from the next bureau. And that way you can stagger them. However, there's many reasons why consumers may be entitled to a free credit report above and beyond this right to a once a year free. Yeah. So, for example, if you know that you are a victim of identity theft, you have the right to a free credit report. If you submit a police report or identity theft report to the credit reporting agencies, that entitles you to 2 more credit reports. If you're unemployed and seeking employment, you're entitled to a free report. If you're a recipient of government assistance, you're entitled to a free report. If you've been turned down for credit, you're entitled to a free report. So you see, Morris, there's many different ways that a consumer can get a free credit report without having to sign up for any of those services.
Yeah. Well, again, that's so critical because as I understand that, Micah, some of those are essentially scams. They're just trying to get you to sign up for some credit monitoring thing, or you get on their mailing list by doing that and do it and getting the report that way. And there's a much better, more efficient way to do it, folks. When you say identity theft, and I know you kind of mentioned that if you think you're the victim of identity theft, you may qualify you or does qualify you for another credit report. What does that mean? What do you mean by identity theft? And if people hear that term, what does that mean from I think it's a legal or even just a common sense standpoint? What do you mean by that when you say somebody calls you to your office and you say they've been a victim of identity?
So in lay terms, it's when someone uses your personal identifying information without your authorization or consent to get something, right? Okay. That something could be a car, that something could be medical treatment, fill in the blank.
Okay. What suggestions, because, this is something that I think a lot of people have concerns about, because every time we go to swipe our card, then, next thing we know, a year or so later, you get the new credit cards with the chip in it, and they tell you, oh, this is so much safer. That ain't true, because my card's still getting skimmed every now and then. But tell us, what would you say, if you were talking to a room full of folks, just, that's what we're doing right now. What would you tell people who are watching our show today? What are some tips or suggestions they can do to protect themselves as best you can from identity theft and data breaches?
Sure. So one way, you mentioned the card getting skimmed. And so I point out to folks, when you go to an ATM machine, when you go to a gas station, put your hand on the skimming device, which is where you'll place your card in, and see if you can move it, see if it'll come off, because it's very easy to put a skimming device on top of an ATM or on top of a gas pump. Yeah. Card reader. We're seeing that all the time. So check it, make sure it's legit. Secondly, if you go out to eat or go out to a restaurant and your waiter or waitress, something goes up, the antennas go up that, hey, I'm not comfortable giving this person my card, then get up, and when you're ready to leave, take the ticket and go to the hostess stand and see if you can run your card right there. You don't have to give them your card and let them go away with it. I guess it was probably 3 or 4 years ago, Morris, I spoke at the Orlando Mayor's Summit, and I was on a panel with Orlando detectives there. and 5 of those officers had their cards skimmed by a waitress in one restaurant. 5 of those officers, 3 of which were in uniformed officers, they figured it out where it went back to, and they went and spoke to the girl, and she confessed to them that she'd been approached by gang members to use this skimming device to take as many card numbers as possible. So it's a very real threat to everybody in restaurants, ATMs, gas pumps. Likewise, I suggest when you're able to do so, use a credit card versus a debit card because you'll have some more protections there. And then lastly, forget about the credit monitoring services out there. The most effective way to prevent identity theft, at least on your credit report, from appearing on your credit report, is to put a freeze on your credit file at Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, so then nobody can get your credit file.
And when you say a freeze, can you give us a common sense what you mean? That if you contact the bureaus and you say, I want to put a freeze on it, meaning nobody can apply for credit while it's under. So if somebody had stole your information, they went down to purchase something on credit, but when they contacted the credit bureau, I guess for verification, there'd be a freeze and then they couldn't move forward. Is that essentially what you mean?
Exactly. So your file is frozen, Morris. No one can get your file, including you, the consumer. And so when someone goes into Best Buy and applies for a credit account, and Best Buy's bank contacts, let's say, TransUnion, and TransUnion returns back, hey, no file. The file is frozen. If there's not a file returned, then remember the discussion we had about the FICO scores? If there's no credit report, then there can't be a score. If there's no score, then the lender can't evaluate the risk decision. The risk being whether this person will pay this loan back or not. So that does two things for the consumer. Number one, the account will not be opened at Best Buy. So you won't have a fraudulent account later appear on your credit report. Number two, and equally as important, is the inquiry. There won't be an inquiry on the consumer's TransUnion report related to that fraudulent application. So again, with inquiries, they have an impact on your credit score. So if that fraudulent inquiry appears there, then it may be a reason that a consumer, the identity theft victim, later gets turned down for credit.
Yeah. Well, folks, that's a huge point, and so you want to check into doing that, and I'm assuming there's some easy ways. I don't want to eat up a bunch of time talking about that, but if you've got questions about how to do that, we'll put Micah's information later in the show, and I'm sure he's probably got some resources. We can find some resources to share on how to freeze your credit report and do that. One thing I'll share that I do, Micah, and one of which you mentioned, which is I try to always use my credit card, and that way, if somehow it gets stolen, it's not my money that they're stealing. It's the credit card company where I'm not waiting for money to be returned into my checking account. But the other thing that I do that has helped me twice in the last year and a half is I have alerts on my credit card and my banking and checking account. And I know some people think it's crazy. I don't care what amount it is. So if there's any charge, and the cool thing was that at a restaurant, you were talking about at a restaurant, before the hostess or the waiter, the waiter comes back, he or she comes back, I get an alert on my phone, or even if I'm at the gas pump, as soon as I slide it in and slide it out, I get an alert that there's been a charge by, whatever it is. For me, it's free service. It depends on how much charges you've got. If you want that, you can set a threshold above $5 you're doing. But my experience has been personally, folks, is that a lot of times when I've had my card been skimmed, they'll try a lower amount to see if they can get away with it, and if it goes through, and then if there's no cancellation, then they'll try a larger. So I just put it for everything. That's been effective, and I just do it through an app through my credit card company. I would assume most of them do that.
That's a great tip, Morris. And in fact, to add on, some of the credit card companies now also have where you can actually, through their app, lock the card or freeze the card, so no transactions can be made on the card. And so if it's your card and you have the app, it's very easy to just put a freeze on it or lock the card, and then when you're ready to make a purchase, just to unlock it too.
That's a great point too. I've often thought about freezing my wife's card. So let's talk a little bit we talked about credit reports and identity theft, so let's merge those two together now. let's say somebody gets their credit report and there's a problem with it. Maybe it's identity theft. Maybe there's a mistaken thing on their credit that's simply not theirs. Maybe nobody stole it, but something was wrongly placed on there. What should a consumer do, the average person that gets their credit report and there's something on there that's inaccurate for one reason or another? What's the first thing they should do?
Identify every single inaccurate item on the report, whether it's an address, whether it's a name variation, date of birth, telephone numbers, accounts, or inquiries. Make a list of all those items. Then take that list of inaccurate items and put it in the letter to each one of the credit bureaus who's reporting the false information. And it doesn't have to be a fancy, in-depth letter. The consumer just needs to identify who they are so that the credit bureaus can figure out who they are to pull their file, and then identify what they're disputing and why they're disputing it. So in the identity theft context, it's very easy. Say, here's my name. Here's the items that I'm disputing. I'm disputing these accounts because they're not mine, right? If you're an identity theft victim and items appear on your report, then they're not mine. So it's just as simple as that, telling the credit bureaus, hey, here's this Capital One account. It's not mine.
Okay. And then you would do that for each credit bureau?
Each credit bureau that's reporting the false items. Right. So again, not all the bureaus may report this particular item. So for the consumer, they need to address it with the bureau who's reporting it.
And then what does the law say? What is the bureau's responsibility once they receive notification from a consumer that there's either identity theft going on or there's something wrong on a consumer's file? What obligations do they have next?
Yeah. So under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the credit bureaus have two options. One, they can immediately delete the disputed information, right? The credit bureaus don't have to report anything at all. The law does not require them to credit report. It just says if you're going to do it, it's got to be accurate. And so they can either delete it, or two, notify the company who supplied or provided the disputed information. And that's part of what we call the reinvestigation process. So the credit bureau then has to investigate what you're disputing. And as a part of that investigation, the credit bureau is supposed to notify the company who provided that disputed information to it. Likewise, the company who provided it, when it receives that notice of the dispute from the credit bureau, then it has to also perform an investigation of the disputed information.
And what happens, Micah, if this goes on and nothing changes? If the consumer finds out or checks that, hey, I disputed this as I understand I'm supposed to, but it hadn't been changed. I've gone back down to the car lot to get a loan, and they're saying it's still showing up 2 months later. Is there a time frame for this to go on in which the investigation or reinvestigation phase is supposed to happen? And if it's not taken care of, what are their options now?
Right. So under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the credit bureaus have 30 days to reinvestigate the disputed information, and then has to provide the response of the investigation to the consumer. In some instances, they may have up to 45 days. For example, if that's after a consumer got the free annual credit report and then made their dispute from it, then the bureau may have as much as 45 days. But the problem with the system on this reinvestigation, if you're a victim of identity theft, you tell the credit bureaus, this item is not mine. The credit bureau pulls the account, notifies the company who's reporting it, and they look and see your name, your date of birth, and your social. Guess what? They're going to say, no, we verified it. This is yours. It does belong to you. So this process of disputes, I recommend to my clients to make multiple disputes because their hope is to get these false items off of their credit report, perhaps by communicating again with the bureau. Maybe they'll get it right. Maybe they don't. But under the federal law, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the consumer then within 2 years that they have notice of this violation of the statute of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, then the consumer can bring a lawsuit and sue these companies to force them to comply with the federal law.
And so that's what you're saying. I guess where you kind of come in is that you help clients who have tried to make these disputes and these inaccuracies for whatever reason are not removed, and then you're helping these folks file these lawsuits. Is that right?
That's right. And so I represent identity theft victims across the country. And a common thread is this sense of helplessness that they have made multiple disputes, sent in even perhaps copies of police reports, and the fraudulent items still appear on their credit reports. They feel as if their last resort is to contact a lawyer and actually file a lawsuit to get their reports corrected and corrected permanently.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I want to touch on, and because I want to be mindful of your time, and folks, hey, more Lilienthal. I'm here with Consumer Affairs Attorney Micah Adkins, and we've just got to be talking about how to get your credit report, and if there are any inaccuracies on your credit report that you should dispute those in writing to the Credit Reporting Bureau, which one or more than one that had the inaccuracies, and then they have 30 to 45 days, depending on the situation, to reinvestigate. And then if they still don't remove the inaccuracies based on maybe sometimes it's identity theft and the person reporting it believes it's you, then you have some legal avenues there that you can pursue through contacting somebody like Micah to try to clear this up on your behalf. But the last thing I want to touch on that I know you help folks with, it's certainly even here in Huntsville and in other areas is a big issue, and that is background reports. Talk to us while people are watching. What is a background report, and how can that affect them as a consumer or as a potential employee when they're applying for a job, and how does that impact identity theft or credit reporting or identity theft, I guess probably more say issues?
Sure. So we're seeing now, because of the price of these background reports has dropped tremendously because of big data, all the data that's out there about all of us, that more and more companies are ordering background reports to determine someone's eligibility for a job or perhaps an apartment. Well, these reports, if it's used for those purposes, it's technically a consumer report. And consumer reports are subject to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So that's why it touches on my practice area. And so what I'm seeing more and more of, where someone has gone and applied for a job and a background report is prepared, and that report includes false information such as it doesn't belong to me, it's not mine. And it may or may not be credit items. Oftentimes background reports are not limited to credit history, but also include public record information such as arrest or convictions. Well, identity thieves, remember, they use your information for something, right? Maybe it's for something like giving it to the police when they get pulled over.
Right.
So there may be an item that ends up on your background report due to identity theft. However, in my practice, where I see clients who come in who believe that they're a victim of identity theft, oftentimes I discover they're not even a victim of identity theft. In fact, what's happened is their file has been mixed with someone else who has the same or similar name as them. It's still a viable claim under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and a claim that I prosecute regularly.
Yeah, and what Micah sees, and I think maybe you can, before we wrap up here, that if you have a very common first and last name, if your name is Jim Smith or John Brown, or if you're a junior or a senior, meaning if you have father that has the same name or similar name, the second and third, a lot of times those files can get mixed up because what happens is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, is that there are algorithms that just will pull bits and pieces of information, and it's the same last name or part of the same last name, part of the same city. Maybe you were born in the same year, and then boom, that gets mixed together and put on your report, even though they may not have checked all the identifying markers to make sure it's really you.
Right. And so to illustrate the point, the credit bureaus don't require 9 out of 9 match on your Social Security number before placing an item on your file. The credit bureaus don't even require a 7 out of 9 match. In fact, Morris, stay seated, but the credit bureaus don't even require a 1 out of 9 match. So as a result, information can come onto your credit file for someone else who has a completely different Social Security number.
Wow, that's crazy. Hey, folks, I appreciate you joining us. This is Morris Lilienthal. I'm here with attorney Micah Adkins, a consumer affairs attorney. Micah has shared a wealth of information about how to obtain your credit report, the things you can do to help limit your access to being a victim of identity theft, and some information about what you can do if you're a victim of identity theft or you have improper things in your credit report, what your rights are and what the obligations are under the law. Micah, if folks want to reach out to you, if people get their credit report or they watch today's show and they've got questions about how to send in the form to get their free credit report, they got questions about how to freeze their account, or they get their credit report after watching today's show, and hey, there's something on here that's not right, and they want to talk to you about it, where can people get up with you at?
No, thanks for that. So folks should visit my website. It's yourcreditreport.com. That's ITSYOU, or creditreport.com. You can contact us there. There's an online chat window there. You can also submit inquiries to my firm from that. You can contact us 24/7, 1-800-263-9091.
Yeah. And folks, so what I'll do, if you're watching here at the end, we'll put Micah's URL website on the comments to today's show. We'll also throw his social media handles out there. He's always sharing good alerts and information about data breaches and other things that you should be watching. So you should follow him on social, on Twitter and Facebook, and follow his Facebook firm page. And so to catch that kind of information. Mike, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate what you're doing to not only help your clients, but more importantly, to advocate for consumers and to help change things so people can know what to look out for and be better prepared to prevent these things from happening to them. So, Micah, again, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Morris. Glad to spend this time with you and your viewers.
Thank you.